Hi friends, welcome back to another video. I'm sitting outside. It's September 2nd, so it's a great time to be outside. It's nice and it's breezy but sunny. It's an amazing day. So I'm behind on two books that I want to review for you, and I'll have the third finished probably this week, I guess. So just a quick review of a book that you've probably never heard of. I hadn't really heard of it. I'm no expert on medieval literature. The Lais of Marie de France. So it's not that long. The Lais are, I guess, I'm not 100% sure where the name come from in terms of Lais. I mean, I guess that it has something to do with bunches of flowers or whatever, but I don't know. But what they are is brief stories in verse, and they are written by this 12th century writer that not a lot is known about. So she was part of the Norman world. So the northern French had conquered England too, right? So the Normans were on both sides of the English Channel at that time. And the influence of French literature was especially strong at that period of time in England. So it seemed, just judging quickly by not any diligent research, but by perhaps evidence from the little poems themselves, that she knew England and she knew northern France, because she names a lot of places in both. Incidents happen on each side of the channel. So just to characterize these, they're typical in a sense of medieval courtly romances, but not in a few different ways. One, they're very brief stories. Now, when I think of stories at the time, I think of like a whole book dedicated to one plot. But there are, I don't know, 20 stories in here, 10 or 20 stories in here, and so they're briefer, but also I find that the content is very interesting because they told from a woman's perspective. I find it quite interesting because it's about romance and stuff, right? So I was very curious to see how a woman would treat the material differently. My big interest in love and marriage and so on over the centuries, I'm always looking for clues on those topics. So one thing that jumped out at me, so the most recent recent medieval chivalric tale that I've read was, I think, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and what's embodied there is a very high sense of chastity. So the whole plot revolves around Sir Gawain's chastity. So he doesn't give in to his carnal desires. So he fulfills the Christian and knightly virtue of purity, of chastity and purity, which is an important topic throughout a lot of the chivalric literature. It's not in something like the Song of Roland or whatever, but it's more mature courtly romance and so on. So we're looking towards, a few centuries ahead of the Song of Roland. Now, Marie de France is very different from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight in this regard. I noted that in most of these stories, so there's 12 of them here, in most of these stories, the romance is consummated, and that's surprising, because the negative overtones that often connotes. Now, I know it might be funny or silly, but it's not. If you've seen Scary Movie, one of the things they say at the end of Scary Movie is that if if the main girl, has sex, then she's going to be murdered. If she doesn't have sex, then she'll be fine. So, whatever the Freudian roots of that are, it's certainly suggestive, right? But that's a big thing in this. But with Marie de France, it's always consummated, and well, compare it to Don Quixote, for instance, where that's not a part of Don Quixote's ethic, right? But is this a specifically or characteristically womanly approach? Like, I know that men and women value sex and love differently, and don't think I've figured out what that difference is or why it is, but I noticed that it is. And in all but the last of the 12 stories, not much is ever made of the fact. So the last story, I think it's the last one. If it's not the last, it's the second last or whatever. The protagonist is married, and he falls in love with a woman in England, I guess. He's French. He falls in love with a woman in England. And a big deal is made out of the fact that he's breaking his marital vows, that the church and the gospel doesn't approve of this, and so on. So, I mean, that's another thing that's quite interesting, is that the church and Christian teaching isn't talked a lot about in these stories, except for the 12th one. So I found that interesting as well. So now you've expanded your horizons a bit. You've heard of Marie de France. Again, not a ton is known about her. Just a lot of speculation of who she was and all that stuff. Looks like she was a real person. Marie de France is as generic a title as you can get, of France. And Marie, that really narrows it down a lot. Interestingly, when I tweeted about having read this book a week ago, I got a like from the Society of Marie de France. Wow, there's a Society of Marie de France. That's kind of interesting. So kudos to them. I'll have to have a look to see what they're up to. That's all I have to say about Marie de France right now. Her stories are interesting. Are they predictable? No, not really, but they're very interesting. And I think that the thing that interested me about the plot structure and so on was that there's still a lot of enchantment in Europe at the time. So what do I mean by that? It's how do we have enchantment? Well, like, what do I mean by enchantment? I just don't mean a magical idea or magical understanding of the world, but that there's a lot of unknown things out there in the world. Like, there can be a kingdom next door that you never knew about, with a castle, a shiny gold castle, that's the next kingdom over that you've never heard about. What kind of rationale or conception of the world does this embody? Like, Europe was the literate people of Europe. They must have known about all the kingdoms, big and small, the names of all the counts and all the abbots and all the bishops and all the dukes. So, but nevertheless, like, look at the geography of Don Quixote. In the early 17th century, Spain is well known, well traveled. Sure, it has some rural and deserty areas and so on, but Spain is well known to the people. But nevertheless, Don Quixote or Cervantes is able to have a lot of nooks and crannies that nobody really knows where they are. They're places of adventure. Um, they're places outside the city where there's law and order, and there's no magical beings. There's no unknown kingdoms and potentates. But Cervantes is able to nevertheless create an unknown geography, or a dark geography, for lack of a better word. And of course, that's one of the most interesting things about movies set in early North America, is there's so much, as I say, dark geography. So great movies really play on this, and a lot have to do with the Wild West, but also the great prairie lands and so on. Even the great woodlands of the north of New England and beyond, Ohio, um, and obviously Canadian literature has always depended heavily on the dark geography, right? But this is not, Marie de France's stories aren't set in an unknown time and place. They're within recent memory. Now, what is that to Marie de France? Is that 100 years or 200 years? Maybe, but that's not a mystical past like the time of King Arthur or the time of Brutus or the time of whatever far distant rulers of England or whatever that we talked about when I looked at Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, which stretches for thousands of years. Um, I guess in a way, like if we think of how Homer treats the Mediterranean, he's able, he's able to lose Odysseus in the Mediterranean, and ships take years and years and years to travel back and forth in the Mediterranean in his time, whereas in the time of Thucydides or Herodotus or whatever, it's like a much more known geography. I hope you know what I'm talking about. But Marie de France, she states repeatedly that she's heard these stories from reputable sources. These things are true, and yada yada. Now, I know that's not an indication that they are true, but that she's not creating fables out of thin air. I think we can reasonably conclude that. Anyway, I do recommend this if you're interested at all in medieval literature. Yeah, so there you go. I'll be back with another video very soon, I think, in a few minutes. Thanks, guys.